If their only strategy that they can rely on is rigidity, maybe I can begin to infuse some of this compliance, because there's a spectrum and there's a polarity of movement. You need to be compliant at times. You need to be rigid at times.
That was Hunter Eisenhower, and you're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Hammer Strength. Throughout the history of this podcast, many coaches and guests have talked about the value of machine-based training as the most simple, straightforward, and more ground, to take a concept from Pat Davidson, way to deliver a powerful stimulus to muscle tissues. Hammer Strength has earned its reputation over decades, not just for durability and build quality, but also for designing machines that move in tandem with natural human arcs and movement mechanics. When it comes to effective solutions in machine-based strength training, Hammer Strength delivers, and I'm excited to have them as a sponsor of this podcast. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. It's great to have you here. This week's guest is Hunter Eisenhower. Hunter is the associate head coach for sports performance at Arizona State men's basketball. He has experience in the NBA and NCAA, and he's the creator of the Force system. Hunter's training blends force production qualities, data analysis, and variability-driven human training methods to build explosive and adaptable athletes. A note before we start, and I apologize, there's an amount of basketball court background noise in the middle of the episode. Again, apologize for that, but it's a day in the life of many a basketball strength and performance coach. This was a great conversation with Hunter. Let's get on to it. Episode 469 with Hunter Eisenhower. Hunter, it's great to have you on the show here, man. I know we're going to have a lot of good things to talk about. And yeah, not too long since we just hung out. When was that Sandbag workout? Like 5 months ago?
It was very cold in Ohio.
Yeah.
I can tell you that. I think it was like January, February.
Yeah, time flies. I feel like it wasn't long ago, but then I'm like, wow, it's June already. And
I know.
It's
we're about to be in another season, and I'm like, I feel like we just wrapped up the last season, so.
Yeah, I definitely dropped the ball, I'll say, because you, after that Sandbag workout, which, we basically, for people, I think we had a little Instagram post about it, but like a lot of like up and down my 20-meter hill with sandbags forwards and backwards and push-ups and whatever, and in between that. And then you had some sort of challenge you threw out there, like it was like a sandbag, hold a sandbag that weighs 150 or maybe as much as you, and just hold it as long as you can. And I think I acted like I was going to do it. I didn't.
You and Trevor Harris, I challenged both you guys.
I didn't do it.
I haven't seen a video yet. It's kind of like so me and my wife have put together it's like a decent home gym in our garage. And that's kind of like our thing that we have people do when they come over is men have a 150-pound sandbag they have to hold. Women have a 90-pound sandbag they have to hold, and you just hold it for time. And it is absolutely brutal.
That's hard. I would rather...
It's so simple, but...
I would much rather carry it as far as I could. Just because having something to do, and it's an interesting thing. I mean, I think, I know we'll talk about like movement variability and robustness, but it's always interesting how much more fatigue you can handle when you have a task to distract you so often. So, and I'm high need of task distraction. I look at I really respect people who can put that to the side and just a straight hold. And there's some holds I can do okay, but that in itself, just that simple thing where it's just you, or like hanging from a bar, you're not doing anything. It's just, it's tough.
It's one of those things that like you have to, like my record is 409 and you have to be in like the perfect mental state to get to those like end limits in a task like that. Because if I go out to my garage and I'm like not really feeling that day, I'll hold it for like a minute, and that feels like my max that day. But whatever morning, it was just me and my daughter. She was playing around, and I was like, I'm just going to try it. And I was like, so my wife has the record, and I thought it was 408. So I was like, I have to get to 409. I get to 409. I tell her right when I get done. Turns out her record was actually 413. And I was still 4 seconds short.
With the 150, or does she get a different bag?
No, she won the 90. She won the 90.
Got it. Yeah. No, I do have a 150 sitting in my garage. I was thinking about it. I do. I mean, I will say I enjoy the heart rate challenge of those things. It is interesting. Like when you if I'm doing like a hang, like a dead hang for time, which I haven't done in a while. I did it a lot more back 5 years ago at Cal, but like periodically just go to the monkey bar and just see how long I could go. And it was, you knew within the first 30 seconds if you were going to get a good time a lot. And it was just so crazy because and it didn't even have that much to do, I think, with anything grip related so often. It's just wherever your general training was at. Like if I was depleted from a nervous system perspective or just a lot of general work to do and whatever, it's like instantly you feel tired. And it's interesting how all that
mental
works.
State.
Yeah.
It's like mental state too, of like how mentally like fatigued you are from whatever you've had going on. It's like that is going to factor in, at least for me, from when I've tried this a couple times now, the Sandbag. It's like, if my mind is in the right spot, like I can typically perform pretty well, 2+ minutes. But if I'm going in with like this is going to suck, like I'm feeling tired, I'm going a minute and I'm dropping it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, there's those games where, I don't want to make this all about like, just like static isos, but it is interesting about, I don't know if it was David Goggins or whatever. Not that I would really like put it on a very high shelf, David Goggins training mentalities for training athletes, but I do think it's interesting. He had like it's like a count to 10, and it's like if it's like you're counting down from 10 wherever you are in the ISO, and if you don't make it, you die, and then you start again, start again at 10 again, and then just keep going or something like that. Yeah, it's interesting, man.
The distraction piece is real because so when I was with the Kings, every trip we went on, it would just kind of like became my tradition. We'd land and I'd go to a weight room and just hold a split squat and just like see if I could get to 5 minutes. And it took me a long time, and I'd get to like, I don't know, high 3s, maybe 4, and I'd be like dying and I'd fall. And there was one day that a guy was coming in to train, and I was like, I got to get this in quick. And I was at like 4 minutes dying, and he walked in right at 4 minutes, and I'm there. And we start just like talking and just like general conversation. And before you know it, I look down, I'm like 4:55, and I'm like, holy crap, I did it. And I like the last minute was like so much easier than the 3 to 4 minute. You know what I mean? Because just I had the distraction and like my mind wasn't on it. And it was just like really powerful to show. Like, and that's what I tell my guys too. Like, we're doing some long duration ISOs now in this portion of the summer. And like, as much as I think it's probably like a little, I don't know, to put it lightly, like overdone to just yell at guys and be like, it's a mental battle, like it's a mental, like, like typical strength and conditioning. But like, I think some of those like long duration isometrics, like it truly is, because you're probably going to fail because of the mental aspect of like how bad this hurts before your physical actually like gives out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. It makes me, I have like an old Moxie monitor, one of those things that measures your like blood oxygen saturation. And the thing is, I bought this like 6 years ago, and I was getting it to see how the state of my, the blood oxygen in my legs when I do an iso hold or something like that. And but I heard like there was some like accuracy issues maybe with some of the older ones compared to like some super high grade. And I bought like this little super cheap PC because it wouldn't run on a Mac. Anyways, long story short, I barely even used it because of those logistics. But I was trying to kind of see how far can I take my my system, like what's actually the disconnect between my mind and my body. Or sometimes I'll take those little blood pulse oximeters. This is the crazy thing, is like, there's people who are going around sitting with like, and I'm not an expert with this stuff, but I think anything below 90% blood oxygen saturation or whatever is not good. Like some people will do it. Like I know, when people are feeling sick or something like that, it's like they'll check that saturation. And usually it's like at 98 or 99 or whatever. Mine always is. It's like right at 99. But if I hold my breath, it'll start to drop. And I mean, if I am just dying holding my breath, like it might hit like 93. And I'm sitting here thinking, okay, I'm dying. And there's people sitting around with like 90 or lower than this who, obviously their body is sick or whatever, not processing optimally. But it's just interesting to think about all those self-preservation mechanisms. So I think about, it makes me think a little bit about like when Brady Vollmering was first on, he talked about doing ISOs and like seeing how long he could stare at something while he did an ISO. Or like, I think there's almost like, it is, I think sometimes about that, like if it's its own specific bracket of training to just dig into something that really sucks, that's really simple. I saw some cool stuff from him recently, like kind of like visualize, like you can visualize yourself from the outside or those various items where it's like a very internal piece, whereas versus most things in sport are more external. There is that distraction going on, and whatnot.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I think that like to that, I feel like this is something I thought a lot about, and this might get us to the variability topic, but like the polarity in a training program, I think is just like so powerful and so important. Like, I think that myself early on in my career, and like sometimes I see this on social media, things just seem like so dialed to one thing as opposed to having like a spectrum of variability. And that means like across the whole, like suck to fun or like heavy to light, fast to slow. It's just like having this like broad bandwidth of variability within an actual training program, I think is like really important. And I know it's a little bit slightly different than the variability we're planning on talking about. However, I do think that like that lends itself to the variability of like a movement library for a specific athlete.
Yeah. Yeah. If I was rewriting a curriculum for sports performance, like I used to teach a class on sports performance for college credit back when I was 26 or something. And I think about like training activities for coaches, like mental activities. And I think one of the best ones, like you said, it would be, all right, take this activity and now polarize it as far as you can go. Like, okay, it's isos. On one end, you have a max overloading, like, Alex Terra style or in the force plate or whatever for 3 seconds, or Bob Hoffman, the old school 1960s. And then on the other, you have 5-minute iso lunge hold. And you can do that for literally anything. Or even like a depth drop. You could say, hey, drop from 8 inches and be really quick off the ground. You can drop from 60 inches and see what happens, but it's until you actually explore the usable bandwidth for athletes. And obviously 60 inches is not going to be usable for all but maybe the most elite, like that Japanese high jumper who did it in that video. But like, it's until we explore those bandwidths, I think it is like, that's just the most simple tool, I think, that can really go a long way. Because otherwise people are like, oh, well, this is how you do it, or that's how you do it. And yeah, so back with the ISOs and stuff, I do think that I like, Rhett Larson was just on this podcast talking about, sneaky stuff, like distraction, right? And like Corey Schlesinger talked about, I remember this was like years ago, he said this, but I was like, it's genius. It's just having a basketball player dribble a ball while he held his ISO, like, and that. And then on the other end, it's like, well, maybe we should spend some time where we try to get that internal, like you're just sitting with yourself on some level. I mean, maybe that's different for everybody too, but
yeah, I think that's kind of how I like to think about these, like the early portion of our summer is like, we're going to get to the individualized, more like nuanced stuff later. But the first 2 weeks of my summer, I try to make it to the point where like, not everything sucks, but there is an element of suck within the programming, and that's part of it to me is like, hey, a lot of these guys haven't held a split squat ever in their lives.
Yeah.
And I remember like the first time I warmed them up on the court, I just had them do like a very short 15, 20 second split squat ISO. And they were like shaking, struggling. And in the middle of it, I was like, how long do you think you could hold this for? And they're like, oh, 45 seconds, maybe. So I was like, okay. So like the last 3 weeks, we went like, you've got to accumulate a minute each leg, a minute 30 each leg. And then this week we did 2 minutes each leg. And guys are just crushing 2 minutes each leg, like after shaking at 15. And I think some of that's just like embracing the mental, and obviously there's physical adaptation going on, but I'm fine with that kind of like suck internal feeling early on in a program. And then we can get to the more nuanced, individualized, quote unquote, sexy stuff later.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like, there's different references on how to train and stimulate an athlete. Like you have on one end, like everything's gamified. Right? And I think you have to gamify stuff, like you have to. But on the other hand, you do have stuff that sucks. And I think the older you get and the higher level you get, there has to be some level of, well, what is training? Training is sitting with something that's uncomfortable. I feel like that's more it's like there's playing and training, and I think they're intermixed in many ways, but training is to sit with something uncomfortable, and there's a bandwidth you can have. But I think that's probably more set. I don't know. It's set in the same ways that some other qualities are set. I don't think that some athletes. working with swimmers, some athletes' bandwidth to train is like insane, and that's their thing. But I think there's just different limits to that. But Joel Reinhardt, I'll have him on again this podcast soon. He had said something. I'd be curious what you think about this, Hunter. But like, basically, he had said like a team's something along the lines of a team's ability to train effectively. They have to be able to do some level of extensive tempo well. If we're talking about college football team, and I think ISOs fit in there, right? It's just the ability to sit with something repeatedly in a structured format and deal with it for a period of time, which is kind of the opposite of gamification, and they both, if we spread things out to the polarity, right? We have those two extremes. So it's interesting that's, I think, another interesting exercise for coaches to toggle between. You can have totally gamified on one end and all that stimulation, and then something that's total training and totally sucks on the other. Clyde Hart 400 workouts or whatever, So I think that's an interesting, like you said, with the polarity, Hunter, as well.
Yeah, you like learn to appreciate the fun whenever you have to do the suck. And probably, I don't know, 5 years ago when I first started thinking about like, oh, you can put like games into a training program, I was like, okay, I need to make this as like fun and enticing, and like guys have to be like laughing and having fun, and the intent has to be incredibly high. And then I began to realize, like, especially when I got back here, it's like I need to infuse that stuff, but there also has to be the other end, and it makes you appreciate the fun stuff more. And like, to your point, like training does have to be like sit with something uncomfortable for a while and do those things that are uncomfortable. And I think that I felt early on the best program was just like the fun, enticing, engaging one. And now I'm realizing in my current state, the quote unquote best program for me in this space is like having the polarity at both ends and knowing when to like ramp one up, ramp one down. Like right now it's a lot of like, I don't want to say a lot of like, there's elements of getting more like interaction with the athletes and kind of like game situations, like some of the partner combative stuff. But then as we transition throughout the summer, like it'll transition to more of like the drive intent through lasers and various games that we'll play and various things like that.
Yeah. It's I think by sport too, it can change in the sense that I remember at Cal, like that toggle for men's tennis, super gamified toggle, and they loved it, and that motivated them. Like their lifts were better with the gamified toggle. But like on the other hand, water polo, I mean, these guys, they would do a workout once a year that was 100 100s. And now if you're in track and you hear 100 100s, oh, that's pretty tough. My college track coach, assistant coach, did that once for fun. I don't know why, but 100 100s in the water, that's like running 100 400s almost. I mean, it's less intense because of the water. It's not like that amount of ground contact. But it's just, I mean, it took them like, I don't know, 4 hours. And it's kind of one of those tough guy workouts or something like that. And like, that was a group that we did a little bit of the fun stuff, but it was not like if I would have done as much as tennis, they would have said, what is this? Like what, just that overall overarching mentality. Now, some of the guys I think would have loved it, but it's like as that kind of general group mentality was, they just weren't in the place for that. And yeah, you also learn to appreciate like the beauty of both. Like a well-planned tough workout that isn't just ridiculous is you feel good after it. Like, and that's what I was thinking too. Like I was going to ask you about the sandbag work. Because I feel like when you're working hard, there's something about a sandbag I appreciate. Like you're fighting it. Like every time you pick it up, it's kind of like you're punching it a little bit. I don't know. There's something about that kind of just feels like versus the enjoyment you get out of a game. So anyways, all this to say, we did the sandbag work on the hill, and I'm curious. I see a lot of like you're in your general training, your general offseason phase right now. I see a lot of like rope pull, like stuff that makes me think about Julian Pineau. And for those people who are familiar with Julian Pineau, like a lot of strongman-y, I would say it's not like lifting rocks, but like more just general, basic, very basic things. Tell me a little bit about what your general phase is looking like right now in terms of some of those more basic, I know you're the term you use is human strength, basic GPP type items.
Yeah. So reflecting on like my previous 2 summers here, I thought I wanted to get kind of like I mentioned earlier, like I want to get to the individualized stuff early. Like I can collect data in the first 2 days and then I can begin to individualize the program. And I found that I was just getting ahead of myself because I was getting guys from all different places with all different training ages that didn't know how to do this, that didn't know how to do that. And I thought for kind of from like a broad overview of like, I just need to take things back down. And I know I only have 8 weeks in the summer. And then I have like 4-ish weeks when they come back from a little bit of break and then the season starts. So really my training before we get into in-season mode is like 12 weeks. So I felt like, okay, I need to get to it, like I need to get to the stuff. But now like reflecting, I was like, I just need to slow down. And there's so many important qualities that you get from like what I call like the early off season portion of my training program. And when I think about early off season, and typically if I had a team year round, which I just don't in the current state of college sports, but like with the guys that stick around after the season, they go right into like, if we're talking about the force system and how I kind of like program, there's high force, fast force, slow, and human. And high and fast is pretty much like sport outputs, depth drops, linear sprinting, fly tens. Slow and human is going to be slow is like tempos and all the ISOs we're talking about and like some local tissue stuff. And then human is what you're referring to, sandbags, the rope pulls, the partner combatives. Typically I reserve that for the early off season, like right after the season ends. But I was thinking like that's an important dose of what I think is like very general and a way to just like touch some capacity work and also touch like some actual like just like local tissue and global tissue resilience. So I thought, you know what, the first 2 weeks of our summer is just going to be that early off season block. So we're actually the last day of those first 2 weeks right now. And the way I structure it is we go a human force day, a slow force day, a human force day, and a slow force day. And we just do that throughout a 4-day training schedule. And now I'll put some of the decel change direction high force stuff, and I'll put some of the linear fast force stuff on those 2 human force days to begin to introduce some of that just like decel change direction work to come and the linear work to come. But what I love about that structure, and I've ran in the early off season, this is the first time I ran into the first part of the summer. What I love about that structure is the polarity we talked about. Mm-hmm. So like the video I posted recently was from one of our days. And we did some just like general acceleration stuff, very basic, resist sprints, fly tens. And then we came in and it was what most people would see as like the strongman, very untraditional. It's like, it would be like rolling, crawling, hanging. That's kind of like a fun block I have. And then we go into a suck block of like, we'll go like sandbag deadlift, prowler march, and the sled row. And then we'll finish with like a partner combative PVC, just like a general carry. And then I threw the long duration split squat ISO in on that day. But then you go to the slow force day and it looks like very traditional. Like today we're doing a snatch complex, like very simple, very traditional snatch complex, pal off press, rear foot elevated split squat, some deep tier hops, some landmine shoulder press, chin up, and then we'll hit some like bis and tris and shoulders. So that's kind of the structure of these 2 weeks. And I love it because it's not just this crazy untraditional training every day. And it's not just this super structured, like what most people consider like GPP every day. It's one day that guys have never done before. And then one day of like pretty much everything they've ever done. And we kind of just rotate that throughout the 2 weeks. And I think from like kind of the qualities that I said earlier, I think the human force stuff is like true GPP. I think a lot of people consider GPP like high volume squat, hinge, push, pull to get them ready for like higher intensity squat, hinge, push, pull. But to me, I think GPP is like going back to the absolute ground level, like basics of just like children, what they would do. They're crawling, they're climbing, they're doing gymnastics and flips, they're roughhousing. And I think to me, that's GPP. And I really wanted to infuse that early on in the summer and then touch on the slow force stuff as well.
Today's episode is also brought to you by the Just Fly Sports online courses. In addition to the Elastic Essentials and Sprint Acceleration Essentials courses, I recently released Sprint Drills Reloaded, which is a mini course that gives you a modern take on sprint drills and specific strength for speed development. This course gives you a variety of methods and modes of execution to help you get more out of your speed training, and you can get the course for a special introductory price until July 1st. Check it out on justflysports.com. Let's get back to the episode. Yeah, I think that was something I realized, I don't know what year of my life, but yeah, we grew up doing that stuff, like you said. And then we lift. We have hopefully have a nice base of athleticism, playing all the sports and playing outside and roughhousing, everything like that. And then you lift, and it compounds the underlying abilities, or it works with them well. But then it's like there gets that point where, well, how much does the lifting outrun those base abilities at some point? Because that's all you did. And I tell you, it's funny, like when I was first getting into strength and conditioning, if I was in my 20s, like I would just watch people doing more GPP stuff, like, like sled pulls or like just different body weight exercises. And I would think, well, wouldn't it be better just to lift more? And it's funny, man. Yeah, like having that mix. The other day I did a workout. I got to be Cliff Harsky. Had some video of himself like swinging a kettlebell on his roof, and I'm thinking like I must look crazy because I ran like 120 up this little hill, and then I would superset it with a backwards. Tim Anderson posted this. It was a backwards crawl up a hill, and I would do that. Sometimes I would do like a low, like a sneaky crawl, and I'm like, the stimulation I'm getting out of this platforms my upper body strength so unbelievably well. Like I am stronger in my upper body lifts because I'm doing this more general kind of work. And I was just doing some kettlebell Z press yesterday, and I hadn't done it in a while, like with my heavier kettlebell. And I was just, but I had been doing the backwards uphill crawls, and I was just crushing it. Like I was like, I'm not even trying to be good at this. Like it's just, there's something about that good general strength, especially as an athlete. And even, I know even like, Louis Simmons and them, I've been reading more on that. I think sometimes you get almost allergic to the powerlifting world a little bit if you're in more of the, if you have that polarity of the functional world, powerlifting world. But like Louis, I mean, he did a lot of that GPP stuff. He talked about, and I've been getting into sleds because of a lot of what he's been writing, more into sleds, I should say. I've always done them, but yeah, it's so powerful, even for the powerlifters, but even more so. How much more so if you are a multilateral dynamic athlete who's doing more than the big three lifts?
And I always felt like, exactly as you said, like, well, the last 2 years, like we have to get right to it and start lifting. But it's like, okay, I know I said I had 12 weeks to like really train these guys, but then I still get to train them for the next however many months. We're just in season, so it has to shift a little bit. But like, and I infuse some of the human force stuff and like warm-ups throughout the entire year. But it's like, if I'm taking 2 weeks out of my entire year of I have these guys, let's say for 8 months, like that is such a minute amount of time to really just dive into this. And like you said, it's just going to make other things better. And I think that especially with when we can also think about what's happening on the court, if I were to go straight to like the high end fast force training with a lot of linear sprinting and a lot of high level decels, guys would get blown up because they're getting blown up a little bit on the court because that's really what the court is. It's high and fast force, change of direction, it's linear sprinting, it's fast contacts. So it's like, okay, let's kind of ease them into my off-season training model of high and fast force and then elements of slow and human with just like this human and slow, because I think while it's not easy, like yesterday they just did this carry circuit. Carry circuits suck and it's brutal. But it's not compounding the things they're doing on the court. It's very different. It's not elastic ground contacts. They're not sprinting. They're not change direction. But it gets them ready for that stuff later. And kind of it's like an on-ramp to the training that we'll be doing over the next 6 weeks.
Yeah, that ability, it is interesting. I think if you would have said, what is strength and conditioning in the year 2000? Oh, that was when I think West Side was really like getting in there. But it's like, it's to get athletes stronger. Well, what does that mean? If it's physical preparation, it's how robust of a base, how many options can I give an athlete to excel in their sport? And yeah, that's strength, but it's also all the movements that go with that strength. And I just think that, yeah, it's great to do those lifts, but I just think we miss if we don't take that time to say, how wide can we throw this net? And how enjoyable can we make that as well? I just think, that's why I think, yeah, like the sandbags, I see your guys doing those rope pulls and stuff like that. And I mean, I guess it does suck, but like, I don't know, just something that I feel like if you're going to do something that sucks, like if I was going to do, I don't know, like if you said, hey, you either got to do like what was that, like Iowa squat workout is like 100 reps of heavy squats, and a bunch of guys ended up like with rhabdo or something. Or you can carry a sandbag. It's something of equal difficulty carrying a sandbag. I would pick the sandbag just because I don't know. It's more like you're moving. Like, I don't know. There's just something to it that I would rather do that. But it's yeah, it's interesting to think about defining what it is of creating that base. It's funny because even if you say base, and I think sometimes there's that connotation with aerobic base, but just this like really rich, like this rich base of all the strength abilities. Maybe that's a good way of saying it too.
Yeah, and it's like I feel like this has been the theme throughout, but like the polarity of training, and like I love to get into the weeds of like force plates and velocity decrements and like that side of things, and like this structured training program that's touching on specific qualities. But then when I'm programming the human force stuff, it's like there's structure to it and there's thought obviously behind it, but it's a lot more just like flow, like what's fun, what sucks, what's fun, like what can be in these blocks from these specific categories that kind of like fit those molds, and then I roll with it. And I love that element of programming that, because it's a lot different than the rest of the program, where I'm thinking about more like nuanced and specific things, and the human force can kind of flows,
Yeah.
and there's certain things that I try out, certain different partner combatives or carries or whatever it may be. Like we carry each other, like guys will carry each other and carry circuits, various partner combatives with PVC pipes. And so it's a fun part of the year to program for sure.
Yeah. It'd be hard to do. It's one of those things that's hard to research, right? Like if,
Oh yeah.
like if you were to have like someone did their a research project on, okay, groups that did more variable, human level, basic Rocky style GPP, and groups that didn't, and who had the least injuries, but even just general basic strength. I don't know. I just feel like in my opinion, athletes get stronger doing that stuff because it's a very rich experience. It's meaningful too. What did you so with the sandbags? Curious how you integrated those with your group.
So the sandbag, like they've always been something that I've loved, but never anything that I've really thought about implementing. We have really heavy med balls that are like 50, 80, 100 pounds, and I've used those in the past. But actually going to your house and using the Octamoves bags, I went home and I bought some. That's what I use in my garage. And then I was thinking about this portion of the year and how I really wanted to infuse the human force stuff early on. And I was thinking, well, I need to get some sandbags. So I just ordered some off Amazon. I have two 150s and a 200.
Oh, 200,
and
nice.
I fill them up at varying weights.
Yeah,
so it's actually like 120, 150, 180. But I just wanted to use them in as many ways as I could throughout this process, because they're going to be holding a lot of dumbbells. They probably held a lot of dumbbells. They probably had a lot of kettlebells, barbells, like that's what most programs are using. And that's what I'm going to use for a lot of the year. But during this portion, I was like, okay, can I just infuse these? So one of our main movements on one day is a sandbag deadlift. And then that transitions to like a sandbag, like over the shoulder throw. I don't know if anybody's going to do that with the 180. That might be a little tough, but who knows? We'll use it for infuse within our carry circuits all the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll take lighter med balls and have them do overhead, but really it's like hug carries, Zercher carries with the sandbags. And then for some of like our weight, like general traditional exercises that we can load with a sandbag, I'll just use a sandbag instead of like a barbell. So we'll have like hip thrust iso right now. And instead of putting a barbell and a pad on their lap, they'll hold the 180 on their lap for 30 seconds and a hip thrust iso. So I'm just trying to use them as much as I can, and they're going to be something that are consistent throughout the season, just at a smaller scale.
Yeah. Yeah. It's certainly it's interesting. I kind of got on a huge kick of using them for a year. I still do for carries regularly. I did for squatted with them for about a year. And I found it like, then one day I went to the gym to do a little filming. It was for the Speed ID course from last year. And it's the first time I had touched barbells in a very long time. And I found that the loss I had was not nearly what I would have expected. Like everything moved pretty easy. Like, and I feel like if I would have had a 3 or 4 week on ramp of the barbell stuff, it would have been really good. So yeah, it's always, but I'm kind of on a little I don't know, I've been using them so much for a year. I'm kind of like, I'm gonna this summer for me. It's like the summer of the U bar, and U bar single leg stuff. Like that's been my challenge more so. So nice. I was gonna ask too with like the sled stuff, prowler push. Like, do you do any like multi? I've been talking to a few people like multilateral, like backwards or lateral sleds. Do you do any of that type of thing as well?
Yeah. So go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, that was it. Sorry.
We'll load up a prowler and just push it from a traditional sense. And I think that like people will talk that specific whatever training acceleration, early acceleration, whatever it may be. But I just think it's like generally pushing something. I kind of have like a push category in my human force element.
Yeah.
We'll do reverse sled drags, but we'll also do like reverse partner walks to where you're back to back with a partner.
Oh, nice.
And you're walking, one person's providing resistance, the other person's providing resistance. Those. We'll do lateral shoulder push partner combatives to where it's shoulder to shoulder, and now you're pushing in person. In a video I just posted, we transition to the point where instead of just like a general provide resistance and provide resistance the other way, now it's like a battle. You're trying to push somebody else over a line. But then we'll also do those things with like sleds. So we'll do like I said, reverse sled drag. We'll do like reverse band walks. And then right now we have like a crossover sled drag to where I'll just load a sled up super heavy, arm out to the side, crossover walk from like a lateral sense. So we're like pushing we're pushing other people, or we're dragging or pushing sleds in, most planes of motion.
Yeah. One of the, it is just funny how I very disregarded a lot of sled stuff for a long time. And I think I just associate with just a muscle, like, oh, you're getting your VMO like backwards or whatever. And why don't you just do a lateral lunge or something like that? But maybe kind of in a similar vein to what I mentioned about the sandbag versus a ton of squats. There's something about, I don't know, there's something about things that are gait cycle related that fit right into the gait cycle that I just think are really special. Like one of my favorite workouts these days, it just works really well. Like if basically my cutoff a lot of times I train between 5 and 6, but if it's after 6, then I have to watch, like I have she's 17 months old now. I have a 17-month-old, so it's like I gotta, watch her. And so if I am running out of time, I'll put her on I have a little spud sled I pull outside on 2 plates. So I got 2 plates. She sits on the sled and I'll drag her backwards. And of course, then the other kids run out and they want to ride on the sled. So it's like, I'll pull backwards, but then it's variable, like you said. Like you don't know who's going to jump on, how much it's going to weigh. And then I'll go sideways. And that's one of the best. It was Austin Einhorn had posted something like a speed skater doing like a low lateral sled, lateral drag, where they're like in that really low position, but it still works. It's not awkward. So I'll go lateral sometimes. And I find that to be, if I do that for like 10 or 15 minutes, my legs are so well warmed up for whatever strength I'm doing after. It's so good. Like it's by far better than if I would have just went in and did some like maybe lighter versions of the lifts or something like that. It's also outside in the sun. It's fun because the kids are like, oh yeah, like they think it's hilarious. But maybe that's the epitome of that whole thing too. Outside, sunlight, bumpy ground, different kids jumping on the sled, different directions. There's all those, you have other people involved. I think that's a big one too, is not just, there's not just that. So yeah, I've been loving the multilateral sled stuff. It's really, if I would go back in time, with work of athletes in the past, especially for, track and field, yes, but especially for team sport, I would 100% make more substantially use of all that type of thing.
Yeah, the warm up piece too is like whenever we get to the point where we're like hitting some higher level decels, specifically on like the high force day when we're doing some change of direction decel stuff, I'm very conscious of like these guys got to be warm. Like our first group's at 8:30 in the morning, and 8:30 in the morning to a college basketball player is like 3 a.m. to a normal person. So I've got to make sure these guys are like warm, ready to go. And I always think like I got to get them moving fast. But one thing I've realized is just like doing some of those like slow reverse band walks or lateral series, or even just like ISOs, but accelerated with the band. Like that stuff is so potent to get them ready for higher level decels just because of the nature of it. I've done it myself and seen how it feels. And then I've also just seen guys jump in bands and do a couple series of whatever it is, ISOs, in an accelerated positions or marches or reverse or lateral like decel work, and they get out of the bands and they're ready to go. I think that is like super powerful on those days specifically.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, I've been thinking like, this term just came to me. I'll change it later, but it's like gait, like human gait is the gateway to whatever your warm up is, in the sense that like if I'm doing a running workout, and especially if like I'm not just feeling my nervous system is down, just doing like lower level tempo that just feels good and easy, and you're just kind of feeling your body start to roll. That's a gateway. It's got to be for me. That could be 300s. It could be a lot. But then in the same, that for like running or jumping, but in the same vein for lifting, I found like the equivalent on the sled multilateral is also extremely helpful versus things where I know a lot of times it seems like movement prep is very, I don't know, it can be kind of artificial. You know what I'm saying? It's based off of lifts, and it's not this like free flowing, more like gait based thing that I feel like the rhythm of gait, that rhythm of gait kind of helps tune the body up too, or you do it to music or whatever. But yeah, I've definitely been digging that more over time.
100%.
So Hunter, I want to ask you, so this was a thing you had been posting this stuff. I just thought this was so cool because I don't think anyone's really, I mean, I don't have force plates. So, I mean, I don't know what, I do not know the details of what everyone's gotten to, but I loved how you had talked about, and this whole fitting with the GPP and movement quality, but like what's good, building a good mover? Like, and yes, we want to have all this rich movement in a program, but how do you know someone's moving better? And you had put something about movement options on a force plate. So tell me a little bit about how you're using a force plate to see what an athlete's movement library is, how jumping with different strategies and the ability to do that, what you might be seeing out of a high level, like a starter versus someone who's maybe a little less, what could you say, athletic in that sense. Tell me what you're finding there.
Yeah, so this is, before I'm just talking with nothing but imposter syndrome, this whole explanation, this is like very preliminary infancy of this thought process. And the way it really came about, just to give a quick background, was working with professional basketball players and working with like really high level basketball players and seeing individuals that from an output perspective are elite most of the time. Now there's situations to where they don't have the greatest of outputs, but especially if you just compare to like general population and even a higher level population of athletics, like I think about the cream of the crop basketball player. If I were to work with, I don't know, put in whatever NBA player you want, is the goal to increase outputs? And I think that like a lot of times when we think about what we do, it's like, okay, their outputs need to go up. We need to make them run faster, jump higher. It's like bigger, faster, stronger. It's like the old adage. Then I was thinking like, is that really the goal with elite athletes? Like, is the goal to increase outputs? And I think that to a certain extent, they all have deficiencies, what I call kryptonites. They all have superpowers. And I think that you can nudge those in certain directions. But I began thinking like, there are certain individuals with incredible outputs, but aren't necessarily like what you deem as like good movers, diverse movers. And the example I use is, well, the finals will be over at probably the point that this episode comes out, but in the finals, there's an individual that plays for the Pacers named Obi Toppin, and incredible athlete. But when you watch him on the court, he looks so much less fluid and rhythmic and coordinated than like Tyrese Halliburton, who probably from an output perspective, like if you compare him to the population that he plays within, it's probably not that impressive. Now, if you compare Obi's outputs to everything that we want to talk about, max vertical and sprinting and whatever else, like incredible. But you watch Tyrese on the court and he's just like so much more fluid and rhythmic and gets his body into different positions that like you don't see Obi do. So I just began thinking like, okay, how can we begin to, you can like see and assess an athlete's kind of like movement library when they play their sport, but how can like the way my brain thinks is pretty systematic, and I try to be subjective, but also a lot of the time objective. And I just began thinking, how can we begin to kind of like quantify this on a very like snapshot level? Obviously it doesn't paint the whole picture, but last offseason, infusing depth drops, and I always work from like compliant to rigid. And I usually go like bilateral compliant to unilateral compliant to bilateral rigid to unilateral rigid if we can get to unilateral rigid drops. And we got to this portion where I was beginning to implement these unilateral compliant drops, and I saw guys just struggled off a 12-inch box.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, land and melt toward the ground. Like, keep your chest up and just melt toward the ground. And guys like couldn't do it, like rigid. And they're like, was that better? It's like, I'm thinking to myself, like, there was no degrees of flexion anywhere. You land and like, you stood like a statue immediately. And I thought, wow, there's probably a lot of value to this. If their only strategy that they can rely on is rigidity, maybe I can begin to infuse some of this compliance, because like we've been talking about this whole time, there's a spectrum and there's a polarity of movement. You need to be compliant at times. You need to be rigid at times. Now, basketball is pretty much the only strategy they want to rely on and do rely on is rigidity, with the nature of the sport. However, there is times, and especially if you think about just like from developing a movement library and potentially resilience towards injury, like there is compliance needed. So I ran with that for a while, and it's like, okay, we're going to keep these unilateral compliant drops in for a while and just like see how much of a range of motion these guys can actually move through and control. And then I began thinking like, well, maybe we can quantify this a little bit. So the season ended. I had 2 individuals sticking around that were working with me, and I just took them through a little experiment. It was just it was a 36-inch box. And I did it bilaterally, and now I'm beginning to think that it could show more maybe from a unilateral perspective, but it was literally just, hey, drop off the box, and I want you to be as compliant as possible. Melt toward the ground, sink, land quiet, because that typically goes with compliance, whereas like a loud sound typically goes with rigidity. And then off the same box, the same session, it was like, hey, land like a statue, like slam on the brakes. I should hear your hits or your feet hit the plates. And then I just wanted to look at like the bandwidth in which they were able to, what I say, like manipulate force. Because if you land really compliant, the peak force is going to be lower. Mm-hmm. If you land really rigid, the peak force is going to be higher. And I just wanted to see, like, of these 2 individuals, who had the biggest difference within their peak force. Now, one individual, and I actually performed it on myself too. It was one individual, me in the middle, and then one of the other athletes below me in terms of difference. And I began to think of like, does this match up with what I see on the court? One of them doesn't play a ton. He was a walk-on, and like I didn't really have like this library of what I like could picture him playing. So to say that like he was the best mover and he had the best library of movement on the court, that'd probably be like a little bit of a stretch. But it was just interesting to then begin to think like, what is the difference in these athletes' ability to be compliant and be rigid? And that's probably just like I said, one snapshot into their overall movement library of being able to kind of like manipulate force in different ways. And I think it's like one objective evaluation that's paired with potentially other subjective evaluations, just to begin to put numbers to some of the things that we already see.
Yeah. I think that's maybe the most basic way of saying that. In some way, I guess it's different within the body, but even a more external is, can you work at different rhythms? And if you look at that as to use a fancy word, like a fractal, like something that appears multiple places, like that ability to change rhythm, to manipulate rhythm, could that happen within a lift or something small too? Might you be better at that?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think I would think out in many ways probably, but for sure, I would imagine somebody who couldn't demonstrate a variety of landing strategies would probably be, and I'm sure you're right, like at some point the AI and that'll just be like, it'll give you, it might be a sad thing too, because if it gives the player their like susceptibility, self-fulfilling prophecy or something like, right? Like, but I'm sure that could be figured out, your ability to deal with the different types. And that's something too, it's interesting with depth jumps in general. I don't think people talk that much, or plyometrics. Like people don't talk too much about using different strategies. It's just, you just be reactive and be poppy over things. And that's good. Like if you can be smooth and just hit the task, that's great. But looking back at Gilles Cometi, his actual pronunciation, he would have different landings. Like this was in the 80s and 90s. This guy was a genius. And I love that AI actually helps you to translate his stuff. Like you can get his books for pretty cheap and just use DeepL or whatever it is. And you can see what he was writing if you don't know the language. But he would have people landing more stiff and people landing at like 90 degrees in knee bend and all those things. And back to the polarity piece, like we should try a few different types of landings and not just get hung up on only one, whatever, and in whatever the bandwidth is, right? Like, because do you need to jump, do a depth jump and hit your ass on the ground? Then probably don't need to go that far, but maybe we do a few that are 90 and a few that are like super like ankle jumpy without much knee bend, and then some that are normal. And that kind of, I've always enjoyed, even in like the research I've done or messing around for research. I remember back when I was doing my master's work, like just exploring with those things is really stimulating. Like saying, hey, if you're an athlete, hey, be as fast off the ground as you can. Now do this task. Now be a little bit longer. And that like net, it's kind of like you're talking about your GPP program, like where there's all these different ways of stimulating the body. That in itself, that variable stimulus in itself is a stimulation. And I just think, again, we don't kind of get into that. So it's really cool that you're seeing some of these pieces show up in athletes' strategies. And what do you think, though, that like those athletes who, let's say they and maybe this would fit with Andrew Paul and the ankle jumper, maybe, but could those athletes who are less, aren't as good at landing compliant, could they still get out and like do windmill dunks and stuff? Like, and you might not. Okay.
Yeah. Like I would say from what I've seen, like the inability to land compliant isn't going to decrease the athlete's ability to like display high outputs. Sometimes, like from what I saw we haven't done as many yet this year, but speaking to last year's group, like what I noticed is that there were some athletes that were, it's actually, I wish that I could like show videos of these athletes just so you could like see them, or like, I'm not going to say names obviously, but there's one individual from an output perspective. Before he got here, everybody's like, oh, you're going to love him. He jumps so high, like runs so fast. And when I got here, I was like, this kid is a horrific mover in every sense of the word. And watching him do those, it was scary. Like the inability to show any bit of compliance and move through any range of motion. Now he's a very elastic individual, utilizes really short ranges of motion, like gets off the ground extremely fast. So it kind of makes sense. But then you watch him just like move, and obviously basketball is not just like sprinting in a straight line and jumping really high. There's so much more to it. And there is like an innate fluidity and rhythm to the sport of basketball that I love. And horrible, like no rhythm, no fluidity, like not good in multiple situations when different tasks are asked upon him, because I just think that he was so reliant on one movement, one section of his movement library. Now there's another individual who also was very explosive and also displayed a bigger spectrum of compliance to rigidity within these things. And like almost any task that I gave him, whether it was a drop jump with like the fastest of ground contacts, or it was like a deep tier, yielding split squat hop, would always perform these tasks really well. And even in the drops, like could move through a pretty big range of motion pretty well and also land really rigid. And you saw him play on the court, and it was just like the ultimate display of like efficiency and fluidity. And again, I'm not saying that his ability to land compliant and his ability to land rigid was the reason he could do those things, but I do think it's a snapshot into some of those qualities that are just like pretty much impossible to quantify.
Yeah. Yeah, you definitely, like you said, you definitely can't insinuate too far and say, well, because I think that's the sometimes the shortcut. It's like, all right, well, because you can't land like this, well, you must be bad at all. Like people can be good at those skills. But I think about, it's funny. I would think about talent ID. And funny enough, I was talking with Stefan Holm even about this, the legendary high jumper. He was saying in Sweden right now, the talent in track is not there because all the players, just like here, all the good athletes are doing the team sports. And wouldn't it be interesting, though, on some level, if there was a talent ID thing where if you, like you said, that player with huge outputs can run and jump, but he's like not as good at variability. Someone told him earlier, said, maybe you should want to try track. Maybe you should think about track. Like it's almost like this, like, hey, I don't know. I'm always thinking about how to get people into track, but it's, it is, because the people though who are in track, like elite track jumpers are kind of like that guy in many senses. Maybe there's sports skills, a lot of times visual stuff, like just, or however they grew up, right? But a lot of those elite level outputters, sometimes they are missing some of that variability as well, that multilateral change of direction, reactive rhythm type pieces.
And I felt like that, like thinking about this piece and then thinking about like what could training look like to trend itself toward the athlete being able to display more variability and not necessarily concerned with outputs. And I was like, I feel like I missed with him because my program last year, now there was elements where I like was doing some of the things that I consider now to be training toward variability, but it was still very output oriented. And don't get me wrong, like I still get young athletes that need to display bigger outputs in a lot of different areas. But somebody like that, if I were to have them this year, their program would look quite a bit different because him going from a 41-inch vertical to a 42-inch vertical is not going to make him a better basketball player.
Yes.
And I don't think that's like mind blowing to anybody. But I think that infusing some of the things I consider now things to introduce the ability to display variability in your movement patterns would have been extremely beneficial for him, but I just didn't have that thought process then.
Yeah. Yeah. It is interesting. It's like outputs are the thing that we all love, but it's like I think once you start seeing those, the other things, I think it's, I think it might be a Cal Newport ism or a Cal Newport teaching of like the things you start to become good at, you become passionate about. And I think initially we're all passionate about outputs, and I still am, and I'm sure I will be until I'm old and gray. But the more you see, and for me, it's more just the visual as much as I can. I don't have the force plates, but like rhythms. Do you have the ability to display different rhythms? Even if I use something as archaic as the speed ladder, I feel like if you called it the rhythm ladder or the dynamic rhythm ladder, I think we need to rename it just so that it can come back and be used for those rhythmic multilateral pieces and not necessarily, this thing's going to get you so fast. You just see kids firing off all the little fast feet drills. I think there's value in those too, but like, it's if we rename that, maybe we'd be able to see some new like landscapes of training come out of it and whatnot. But yeah, it's like once you start to see movement a little better, you become passionate about that too and helping people feel like, yeah. And I totally agree with you too. Like, all right, you jump 41. Well, if you jump 42, we can throw that on the gram and like, like you got that. But yeah, is it going to make you a better basketball player? Probably not. It is.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's like, what do they say? It's like people want, you want to have a little bit of that Prius engine in there too, that like sustainability. It's not flashy. It's not sexy to say I want my athletes to have a little bit of that Prius, like sustainability, reliability. But at the end of the day, it gets you through the season and, you got to move well. You have to move well to be able to have those things.
100%.
So, well, good stuff, Hunter. Well, hey, I'm glad for the questions that we were able to cover here. I know your time is a little limited today, but I like this being a little bit more short and sweet of episodes. And it definitely gives me good things to think about with that variability. And, if I ever get a set of force plates, I will love to go through these things. So, is there anything else you wanted to mention or any other thoughts before we close out today?
Two things I had written down to kind of give one, my thought process on the training, and then two, to give some credit to an individual that kind of like introduced a new topic to me. One was we had the Move the Needle Symposium and Harjeev Singh, who works for the Charlotte Hornets, presented. And he talked about cueing and like CMJs on a force plate.
Yeah.
And I've always held true to the consistency of cueing, consistency of setup, consistency of execution. So the data is like as consistent as possible. So you can actually like rely on the results as opposed to like various cues, various setups, various timings. But one concept he introduced was giving various cues to see if the athlete could display various strategies to achieve a certain result. So I always say fast and high before an athlete jumps. But his idea was like, hey, maybe you throw this isn't like your consistent evaluation process. This is like your, every once in a while. It's like, hey, jump as high as possible and just like see what they do with that. Hey, jump as fast as possible. And if an athlete that's jumping as fast as possible falls apart and they jump 25 centimeters lower than they usually do when you say fast and high, it's like, ooh, that shows something. Hey, jump as high as possible. And they only jump 2 centimeters higher, versus the athlete that can like achieve relevant outputs with a fast strategy impressive outputs with a high strategy and just kind of like messing around with the cueing. I think that's something to like think about, and it just like opened my eyes to, well, maybe you could mess around with variable cueing as opposed to just fast and high and keeping everything super consistent. And then just to put a bow on this and to put it out there to see if I can get any feedback from you or anybody from a training perspective for some of this variability stuff. And I said I missed on the individual last year, and it was potentially too output oriented and not as like variable and movement library oriented. Some of the things I've been thinking about from like a training perspective to infuse some of this variability would be like looking at the foot and exposing the foot to various positions within training. Because I think that like the ability to show variability in movement starts at the foot, and your foot's ability to interact with the ground in different ways from like a ground contact perspective, but also like the position your foot gets into. Because if your foot can't get into a position, the rest of your body won't be able to get into a variable position. And then that takes me to like Alex Effer's stuff of like phases of gait and getting athletes into early stance, getting athletes into mid stance, because what I've seen is like so many basketball players want to rely on late stance always. And whatever you put them in a front foot elevated position, they're still going to shift forward and try to be on their ball their foot. And I think that like that's another aspect of like the foot that I think is super powerful. And then the last thing I love to do within my training is just, which I know you do too, but like every rep different, where it's just like, hey, you're doing this single leg RDL, whatever traditional exercise you want to choose, lunge, but every single rep has to look a little bit different. And I love that with like lunge variations, because it's like, no, don't just step in a different way, like contort your body in a different position. And I think that exposed them to positions they've probably never been in before. And I think those things begin to contribute to them being able to manipulate their body in different ways. And then along with compliant drops, rigid drops, deep tier plyos, drop jumps, kind of that spectrum of manipulating force as well.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that with the foot, because I think that's something where you would wonder, you have that player for a year who has outputs but struggles, put them in mid stance, back into their heels, show them their heels for a year, get their split squat set up and come back, and what changes might you see? Or at least they have the potential to make it easier, because it's like, to use a Bill Hartman phrase, it's if you don't have the space and you take on a superficial strategy to try to absorb that drop, it's just, I mean, a good athlete I think could do it, and they do it, but it's also a lot harder. So to be able to open that space.
When you watched him play, it just seemed like everything was like, obviously there's vast multi-directional movements within basketball, but I do think that there's a bandwidth of the athlete's ability to display multi-directional movement, obviously. And if you watched him, he was so much more like sagittal relative to the rest of the population. And I think a lot of that there's so many obviously qualities that go into that, but like from a physical sense, I do think it starts at the foot. And it's like, if your foot is not like running on a curve, like run a curve sprint and see the demand at the foot. And some guys are awkward, and he was awkward and really poor at it, and other guys kind of flow. And to me, that like has a lot to do with the foot and the ability of the foot to interact with the ground in different positions. And if it never gets to those positions, it's not going to do it at high speeds, at high rates, with stimuli and everything else going around.
Yeah. If you don't have that going on, that as well. And even like athletes, I remember in grad school, just quickly, it was interesting. So I ran a thesis where I observed all these. This was my big force plate. This was before force plates were a big thing for performance or athletic performance, really. But you'd see all the different force time curves of all these different athletes in my master's thesis. And I just remember we had a few people from my class. And I just remember them hitting like just an absolute ton of bricks, like instant force spike, passive spike through the roof. And I was like, and to think back, I would imagine some of those people probably really lacked just straight up foot mobility. Just like they didn't have options in the foot to start with. And it's almost like the only instant strategy available was, hey, let's just stiffen the whole system up or something like that. So to look there as well. Being a critical space. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah. Always been really interested in the foot, but I think this is kind of like giving me a new lens, a new kind of selection of programming to think about, is like not just getting barefoot and tactile stimulation and that realm, or like short ground contacts and the structure of the foot, but like can I contort the foot and put it in different positions and put them in isos on slant boards and leaning against the wall and like get the foot and accumulate volume in these like variable, uncomfortable positions with the foot to try to then contribute to being more comfortable to have those foot positions and more dynamic actions in sport.
Yeah, back to Kometi in the 80s, the beauty of the 80s and all the Polish boxes. I wish that was another thing too. It's someone I had posted on Instagram like Yuri Verkhoshansky and the stall bars. It's like we lost the stall bars and we lost all those Polish boxes, man. All those
Polish boxes are awesome.
So good. I mean, somebody needs to start a company that starts making those and making them more accessible. It's like bulky, a little bulky, probably or whatever. Yeah. But I'm like, those two things. I mean, it's crazy. I just use slant boards for that purpose, and I like barefoot and the tactile, and it's great. But those need to come back. That's something that's very high on my wish list, to be honest. So the variability associated with that too in the foot, it's so good.
I like throughout the summer, I'm pushing my own time here, but whatever, I'll be fine. I have 20 minutes till they come in. Throughout the summer, I've been thinking about how I can like kind of progress this, and we're going from like right now, the guys are about to come in, and we're going to go. It's like leaning variations. They're leaning away from like a rack.
Yeah.
And their one foot is down, and it just puts your foot in like subtle different positions. And then I'm thinking like, okay, you progress that to like a lean and a slant, even more extreme positions. And then I'm thinking like, we'll do like 2 PVC in the ground as balance, single leg on a slant board, but like a medial lean or a lateral lean, just to get them to different positions. And then some of those Polish box with you can set up a DC block pretty well to kind of create like Polish boxes and like progressing that to more dynamic action. So it's like slow, static, accumulate volume in these weird positions. Now we'll do some like oscillatory reps. Now they're moving the limb in that weird position, and then move to more like dynamic stuff on these makeshift Polish boxes. But yeah, we actually had one Polish box when I was with the Kings, and I walked in the first day. I was like, what the hell is that? But it was one of the rounded ones.
Oh yeah.
We actually had guys on it a decent amount, and
heck yeah,
I love them. I would love to have like a series of those.
Yeah, well, yeah. Post your improvised series. I'd be curious to see.
Yeah,
that.
I will.
Yeah,
I will.
That's all we can do in the meantime until they become more mainstream. And somebody needs to start a company with Polish boxes and stall bars. So
seriously,
one of these days. Anyways, Hunter, I know you got to get going here. Thank you so much for coming back on the show. It was great talking to you, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it.